Well, hello everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Out of Left Field. And Jonathan, how do we follow how do people follow us?
Yeah, so we are recently launched on Substack, and that's where you'll be able to find all our links from our podcast and eventually written content and video content. It's going to be really good. We're still growing it out, but our home base, our central hub, as it were, is on Substack. We're on social media, out of left field Facebook, out of left field on X, and I will get you the X handle. The X handle is Outa LF Pod, OUTTALF Pod. And our podcast episodes and everything is sent out as links on the socials. And our episodes live on YouTube, that's the video version, and on Spreaker as the audio version, and everything is out of left field. And more coming as we go, including an Instagram page once we mature our podcast a little bit more. But we'll keep you up to date on everything. Basically, it's out of left field everywhere.
All right. Yeah, and this is a bit of a sad episode that we're talking about Bobby Cox on the same week that Ted Turner passed. Mostly known for the Atlanta Braves, but it did spend some time with the Toronto Blue Jays. Passed away on this weekend. He passed away on the he passed away on Saturday, and we wanted to spend a bit of time talking about him and his legacy. And Jonathan was not alive for the Bobby Cox era in Toronto. I was, so I'll kind of go through his career. Of course, his managerial career started in the Yankees farm system in 1971 with the Fort Lauderdale Yankees. He was promoted to the West Haven Yankees in 72 and to Syracuse in 73. In 76, he led the Syracuse Chiefs to an International League championship and managed the Cardinals in the Venezuelan Winter League. He then spent the 1977 season as the first base coach of Billy Martin when the Yankees won the World Series. He was a manager with the Braves from 78 to 81, and of course, he inherited a team that finished last in the National League and compiled a worse record than the expansion Seattle Mariners that year. And then he then went on to the Toronto Blue Jays from 1982 to 85. Of course, he was part of the 81st ever division title. He managed the team. He led the Blue Jays to the first winning record in 85 and the 4 seasons with the club. They finished in first place in the American League, first division title. And that was when the American League Championship Series was expanded to a best of 7 from a best of 5. And they were up 3-1, but they did lose to the Kansas City Royals. And the Atlanta Braves went after him for be the general manager in 1985. He ended up returning to Atlanta as a general manager, of course, due to family reasons. And then in 1991, he came for the Braves. Came from last place to first place, and the Twins won the World Series in that year in a classic. And then the 1992 to 93 with the Braves, which was basically from 86 to 10, 2010. He led the Braves to his managerial record. Let's just do his managerial record here. Let's go through that. He first in the West from 91, 92, 93. first in the NL West, and then they switched to the NL East, and then they win the World Series in '95. They lose the World Series against the Yankees. They lose the NLCS against Florida, against the NLCS against San Diego, and then lost the World Series again in 1999 against the Yankees, and then lost the NLDS to St. Louis. They won the NL East 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3, 6, 9. I'm going to make sure I get this right. 10, 11 years in a row. They won the NL East. And then in 2010, they got back into the playoffs and lost the National League Division Series to the San Francisco Giants. So his career was basically mostly built with the Atlanta Braves and restoring that franchise. That being said, Jonathan, he did have a career with the Toronto Blue Jays, which I touched on a little bit.
Yeah. Everybody who talked about him from his Blue Jays tenure, you hear a common theme about the Blue Jays' expectations being leveled up. Even early in his tenure, they were struggling their first few years as an expansion team coming in 1977. And that first year, 78 wins, but then back-to-back years of 89 wins, and then the big, the division title, first ever division title with 99 wins in 1985. It earned him Manager of the Year. I believe the 1985 year saw the introduction of the Barfield, Mosby, George Bell outfield.
Yes.
So Bobby Cox steered the ship for the Blue Jays into their first window of success and their first iconic moments that'll live forever in the franchise. They didn't finish it off until several years later in 92, 93. But he was a huge figure in terms of wins and losses. He was a huge figure in starting to move the Blue Jays up the hill for the first time.
Yeah, and it's kind of he is sort of the foundation of what the Blue Jays were really built on because of course everybody is going to remember Cito Gaston. Everybody is going to remember Jimmy Williams, who was also a key figure. Everybody will remember John Schneider, but Bobby Cox was the one that really was part of that. And that staff included the third base coach, Jimmy Williams, hitting coach Cito Gaston at the time, as well as pitching coach Al Widmar, who they had a really good staff those years too. I mean, that 80s year you were with Dave Steve, Doyle Alexander, Jimmy Key were some of the names over there, and eventually you get Tom Hankey as a closer. Then you move to Dwayne Ward. So, and then Pat Gillick is a key member, of course, also. So, Bobby Cox is sort of, I would describe him as the grandfather of what the Blue Jays ultimately became. And I would say if it were not for him and his influence, I don't think the Blue Jays are in the position that they are right now.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that he had Cito Gaston on his staff. One of his his catchers, two catchers that caught for him in his tenure, Ernie Witt and Buck Martinez, two more legends of the Blue Jays franchise. And in terms of being a foundational piece, it goes further than the wins and losses. When you listen to Bobby Cox's former players, whether it be from Toronto or from Atlanta, you really learn how much that he cared about his players. As someone who was in my early days of following baseball, when he was in Atlanta, then the narrative around him as time went on, um, a bigger part of their narrative became the ejections record, and that was entertaining, absolutely. Um, but listening to his former players, he really cared about them, and they really cared about him. And I think that unifying effect really brought that nucleus of early mid 1980s Blue Jays together. Um, for that 85 year.
Yeah, you one of the players I heard a story from was from John Schmaltz, who told a story about him ending up getting an invite to the Masters from Tiger Woods. And Smoltz went to Bobby Cox and said, "Can I go?" And they quietly sent him on a private plane to the Masters. And one of the things that Smoltz says is Cox said basically gave Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz as much leeway. They would do their pitching and get their work done before everybody else. And if any player complained about it, he basically said, "You're not going anywhere without Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz pitching." So they are going to be. The point being with that story is that he knew how to push which button as to when. And certainly known for, I think a very similar legacy is what he did with the Blue Jays, with that Blue Jays pitching staff, and what he ended up doing with the Atlanta Braves pitching staff, with Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz. I mean, should they have won more World Series? Sure, but they were also kind of in that during that year, during the Bobby Cox era. I think the things that people have to remember was how good that New York Yankees team and how complete that New York Yankees team was. So, yes, they didn't get always to the World Series. That's totally fair, but there's no question that Bobby Cox is one of the greatest managers, one of the all-time greats, and needs to be. I hope does get some sort of when the Braves come to see the Blue Jays. I hope they do something special for Bobby Cox, or even when the Blue Jays go to Atlanta, that there's some sort of, because the connection between the two are there. And of course, there is a World Series between the two back in 1990, back in the 90s as well. So
93, yeah.
93, yeah. I always get those two confused, right? Because there's 93, 94. But Bobby Cox's Blue Jay record with 647 games, 355 wins, 292 losses. Of course, a 7-game series against the Kansas City Royals. And then his managerial record for Atlanta was 2,149 wins, 1,709 losses, and overall record 2,504 wins, 2,001 losses. And yes, a record though that is going to be very tough to beat with 11 straight division titles. That's something you'll never. That's going to be his legacy
for sure. And bringing it back to the Blue Jays for just a minute, you mentioned some of the great names that played for him in Toronto, and I'm not sure if you got to Tony Fernandez, beloved infielder who played for the Blue Jays on, I think, at least 3 different tenures. He had a young Kelly Gruber. And so, like, you look at, I already touched on Buck Martinez and Ernie Witt, catchers, and Buck went on to be a manager of the Blue Jays for a time. Ernie Witt is the storied manager of Team Canada's senior national team. So a lot of his players went on to be respected and have success in later chapters in their baseball careers. And through my opportunities in baseball, I've had a chance to cross paths with people like Lloyd Shaker Mosby, Kelly Gruber, J.C. Barfield, and a common thread that you get from all those guys when you meet them and talk to them is how much they still care about the Blue Jays organization. I, back a while ago now, had a chance to have lunch with Kelly Gerber when he was in Victoria for a baseball function, and still talking about the Blue Jays' current team and using the word we. And so that's how connected they were and still are. And so that's really, that's really cool to hear. Um, yeah, it's and on the Atlanta side, I saw something on X, and a couple of people repeated it, but I saw something on X that said, that mentioned Ted Turner and Bobby Cox pass away in a short time frame, and someone said their memorial better start at 7:05 p.m.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
pretty fitting.
that's very fitting. That is true, of course, with TBS being a big part of people's knowledge of the Braves during that time. Two other things just with the Blue Jays. One other player you do need to mention here, I think, when you're talking about the Blue Jays is Fred McGriff. Fred McGriff was actually part of the Blue Jays and the Braves as at a time. Of course, you mentioned Tony Fernandez and Fred McGriff. Of course, one of the most famous trades in Blue Jays history is Fernandez and Fred McGriff for Joe Carter and Roberto Alomar. And that outfield of George Bell, Jesse Barfield, and Lloyd Moseby at the time was considered the best outfield in baseball. So, as the years went on, certainly the influence, especially George Bell, is one for younger Blue Jay fans. I would recommend you look up those teams because they were a lot of fun to watch back then. So, but yeah, so. Um, I think we've covered pretty much everything about Bobby Cox. I don't think there's anything else to talk about.
We've done a pretty good job. I'm sure there is, absolute legend. Did a ton of things. I'm sure there are other things. I brought it up earlier, and I just want to put the number on it. 162 ejections over 29 seasons, which will now always be, you figure, always be the record for manager ejections. As technology now aids a lot of umpire decisions. A lot of the opportunity for fireworks has been taken out of the game, probably mostly for the best. But just on the lighter side of things, kind of away from baseball a little bit, the ejections record is part of his story and something that now I think we can look back and smile at, because that was entertaining sometimes to see him go out there and get his money's worth.
Yeah. Him and Lou Piniella were some of the more entertaining ejection managers. Billy Martin as well was always entertaining for that too. It is a end of an era in that sense that we don't have that anymore with the ABS. And you're probably right; it is better for the game, but it was certainly entertaining. Well, let's leave it there for now. You can, of course, follow us, as Jonathan mentioned, on socials, Out of Left Field Podcast, Twitter, out OTUTTTALFPOD. Find us on YouTube, find us on audio, find us on Spreaker, Facebook, and as well as on Substack. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon. Rest in peace, Bobby Cox. Bye for now.